Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that invites you into discussions taking place in your community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, the Dean and Academic Vice President of the college, Michael Marsden.
Good evening. My name is Michael Marsden, and I am your host for this edition of Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our very special guest this evening is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author and television commentator, Mr. Haynes Johnson. Mr. Johnson holds a master's degree in American history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is now the Knight Chair at the Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. After serving for 3 years in the Korean War as a first lieutenant in artillery, Mr. Johnson began his newspaper career in 1956 as a reporter for the Wilmington News-Journal. In 1966, he won the Pulitzer Prize for distinguished national reporting of the civil rights struggle in Selma, Alabama. At its May commencement ceremony, St. Norbert College awarded Johnson an honorary Doctor of Laws degree in honor of his lifelong service to journalism and American political thought, along with his many other personal and professional accomplishments. Mr. Johnson has reported on virtually every major national and international news events in the past 4 decades, and he is the author of many books about the American political and cultural landscape. He appears regularly on PBS television programs such as Washington Week in Review, The News Hour, and The Jim Lehrer Report. Mr. Johnson, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Really very pleased to have you.
Delighted to be here. It's great to be here.
Well, you're actually back to our campus.
Yeah.
I believe you were a lecturer here back in the late 90s.
I think that's right, yeah.
We're glad to have you back. Now, as an author of about a dozen books, including your current work in progress, and a career, as I said in the opening, that spans 4 decades, are there 2 or 3 events in your career of that extended time that really stick out in your mind as maybe the most important events of historical significance that you were part of?
Well, I'll tell you, I was very lucky. Lucky to be in journalism, which is dying right now, it seems.
Having a hard time.
Having a hard time. At a moment when so many things were coming to pass. I came to Washington in 1957, and Eisenhower was still in the White House, second term, and I watched all of that take place in the Kennedy administration. But I think watching the civil rights period, the transformation of the country, and it's hard for people to realize how totally segregated we were. Yes. When I was covering stuff in the South, I've seen people clubbed to death just to march to the courthouse to register to vote. It's hard to believe that today. Yes. So that kind of transformation. And then we had riots, and then we had the assassinations. I became very, very close to Bob Kennedy and was in the kitchen the night he was shot. So all of those events, one after the other, I can't tell you what was the single most. They all went together. And it changed the country, of course, changed me. And it was a great privilege to be able to be a witness to that period and try to make some sense out of it if you can.
And it makes the recent election of Barack Obama as president all the more meaningful given that context.
Absolutely. And the reason this new book that I've just about to finish, I thought it was probably going to be the most important election of my lifetime because of so many things coming to bear at once. I mean, you have the first potential for an African-American president literally in our history, the first potential for a woman to be president of the United States, Hillary Clinton. You had this whole transformation. All the issues were up for grab. The United States was facing conditions it hadn't seen since the 30s, with the economic collapse, with 2 wars overseas, sort of a dispirited sense of the country, which is not America. We believe we're optimistic. But it was so that's how I started this project.
And you've been at that project 2.5 years,
2.5
as I
years,
recall?
full time.
You started from the beginning of the campaign all the way
Before the campaign.
Before the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I signed up and I brought my colleague Dan Baltz of the Washington Post, who's the lead political reporter, as my co-author. I couldn't have possibly done this myself. And we divided it up as a sort of inside, outside. I'd deal with the public and the voters and the issues and what was happening and all that. Dan was sticking with the candidates, strictly with the candidates. Okay. And out of that period, we literally had produced a book called The Battle for America, 2008. But it's not just about Obama. It's about the whole process and why it was important, why the election told us about the change that people wanted with question marks. Is it going to work? How's it going to come out? So forth.
And that book is going to be out later this summer.
It's coming out this summer, and thank heavens. I mean, it's been a long period.
What's the title?
The Battle for America, 2008.
2008.
And the idea of that is that it really was a battle for the new America. We're passing through a period of history that's different from anything we've known before. And nobody can tell us how it's going to come out. I'm optimistic. I'm just naturally an optimist because of things I've seen in my own life. I've seen tragedies and tumult and terror and assassinations and wars and riots and all that, but we've always surmounted them. And I have every confidence we'll do it this time. But it's going to be hard because it's so different.
And so many challenges. You had a long career with the Washington Post, as I recall. It was 1969 and 1994.
Yes, and before that, the Washington Star.
So was the Washington Post this kind of very special place in the history of journalism that it's often characterized as?
Yes, it was. Ben Bradley, the executor, hired me away from the Washington Star to join the Post in 1969. I had been at the Star 12 years. I was fortunate. I had my own budget. I could do anything I wanted, go anywhere. I didn't have to, for anybody else, cover stories at home and abroad. And he said, we can't give you your budget, but I'll guarantee you, you come to me with an idea, and I'll guarantee you'll be able to do it. And so it was a special place. I mean, everybody was excited. You had the belief that we were trying to do something important, that we wanted to tell stories in a way they hadn't been told before in daily journalism. And Ben was, I love him. I mean, I'd jump out the window for him. And I think we all felt that way about that year, that period. And that led into the fight. By the time of Watergate, I was assistant managing editor.
I see.
And helped edit those stories and so forth.
Interesting. Do you think that time will ever come again? Different newspaper, different time?
It has to, because we can't have a society without an informed public. I am an absolute fanatic about the need for citizens to be informed, to take responsibility. And if you don't have journalism that is willing to pay the price, to have bureaus overseas, to cover the Congress, to cover the state houses in a way that people don't these days. They're just shutting it off. And so I think that the country will need that. Somehow we're going to get through this. It's going to be different.
Kind of a different kind of a question to ask you, I think, and that is that, and it was this book, particularly the Best of Times, America in the Clinton years, that really, borrowing a title from Charles Dickens.
Right.
But as I went through that book, it struck me that would it be fair to characterize you as a storyteller as much as a journalist or a historian?
Yes, I'd like to. Thank you. I would like to say I'm a storyteller.
That's how this reads, I think.
You flatter me. And that's what I would like to have people say. Storyteller, not fake stories, but a narrative.
Our stories.
You're trying to tell our story. That's what I've tried to do in my whole life as journalism, on books and articles, is to try to tell the story. The only thing that you can do in journalism or whatever is to try to tell people who are not there, I feel I'm the witness for them, and to tell them what it's like to be there as much as you can, and the stories of people around them, and then to try to tell it in a narrative so it has a sweep and a movement that will carry you into the future. And if I've done that a little bit, I'm pleased.
I think it works. I think it's there.
Thank you.
I think it really is there. When did you first become interested in a writing career? When did it first grab you? Because it seems that you were in college, you went into the service, and then you came out. But was it there earlier in your life?
Well, I have a very complicated background. My father, Malcolm Johnson, was a Pulitzer Prize winner. We're the only father and son ever to win. And he was a great New York newspaper man. He was a war correspondent in the war, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, on the Missouri when the surrender was signed. And when he went off to the war, I was 13 years old, and I read his stories from all over the place. So I grew up with that kind of background. And I didn't try to follow his career, but I naturally liked writing.
Well, of course.
I liked to tell stories, and I liked to be a witness and so forth. So in that sense, he was very wise about me. His father had been a lawyer, apparently a brilliant young lawyer, who died in the flu epidemic, think about this, in 1918, and only 43 years old. And my father was the oldest child. And my father worshipped his father, but didn't think he knew him very well. There was a distance, a very scholarly man. And so he taught me to call him by his nickname, Mike. So it was Mike and Haynes, Hainesy, as he called me. And we just became very, very close. I adored him, and I couldn't try to follow his career, but I naturally went into journalism I think that's what happened.
Was oral storytelling part of your family tradition? Did you share stories around the table?
Well, yes. We had a wonderful house. They all loved books, and we all had stories. We had one, there was somebody, a great-great-grandfather wrote a history of the family. It was a narrative, telling stories of the Revolution and so forth. It wasn't just this boring, and so-and-so begat and so-and-so begat, but they were real people, and it was fascinating. And so I grew up in that kind of environment. I was very fortunate to do that. And we were very interested in public affairs. We'd have debates around the table, and then we would have parties and bring in people from all over the place. So I was a very lucky person.
Well, that sounds like a rich environment.
It was.
Now, as a writer, I'm always interested in this because writers have different schedules and different ways of doing it. But do you write every day? Is that a routine?
When I am writing a book, this is where the newspaper work came in handy. Deadlines are terribly important. You can't wait for the muse to strike and you feel like writing. You got to put your seat down on the chair and pound it out and write. If you don't do it every day, and there are days when you can't do it, you have to go somewhere else. Right. But I like to get up early in the morning when I'm on a writing schedule and write as long as I can, and then the next day I take it back and reread it and then edit it. And I don't do it on the computer. I take it out in hard copy. Okay. I don't know why, but it seems to me you see it differently.
It's your newspaper background too. Probably.
Yeah, but I like but if you don't do it every day, it never gets done. And I think that having the discipline to do it, whether it's any good, that's a whole other question. Yeah. But you have that's where you do it.
Thank you. That was one. I think writers have that discipline. It's just built into them, or they don't succeed.
Well, maybe stupidly or not, but I don't know how else to do it.
Now, when you won the Pulitzer Prize in 1966, I'm sort of curious as to how did you react to that in terms of your own career? Did it spur you on to get better work, or was there a temptation just to glide?
The nice thing about
that's young. When you were relatively young,
very early 30, 31, whatever it was, I don't know. But the nice thing about it, once again, to tell the story about my father, that year I won the Pulitzer Prize had the first and only. Now they've had one since then. Actually had a ceremony where they gave out the prizes in person. They took over the ballroom at the greatest hotel in New York, and a black tie. Every living Pulitzer Prize winner, the novelists, the historians, the poets, the journalists, the musicians were all there. It was the first time they'd ever assembled because it was the 50th anniversary of the prizes.
I see.
And my father, I called up my father.
So he could visit. We go with you too.
Yeah, well, he didn't know, but I had been tipped that I was going to win. I had advance word. So I called my father and I said, Mike, are you going to the Pulitzer Prize? And he said, yeah, Haynes, I am. Why? I said, well, I'll see you there. What do you mean you'll see you there? I said, well, I'll see you there. Well, I can't get a ticket there. No, And I said, no, I'll see you there. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean you'll see me there? I said, well, because I won. He almost had a heart attack. So the nice thing was, and they introduced us from the floor, and he stood up and he cried. And that was what was wonderful about it. Did it spur me on to do something else? You hope you live up to it. You hope you're not taken by the prize glory. I was very happy because of my father and my connection.
Oh, it's a wonderful connection. We should share with the readers, though, the reason your father won the Pulitzer Prize. And I think that's an interesting piece of history as well.
Yes, he won the prize for a series of articles he called Crime on the Waterfront. He spent months and months of his life looking into what we now call the mafia, the mob control of the New York harbor. They literally controlled every single pound of cargo that entered the ship. It was a pirate's nest. They murdered people with impunity, and it was a very dangerous operation. Some people that he talked to were killed. Several that later on went to the electric chair because of his expose. The union was the International Longshoremen's Union was the only time a union has been expelled from the AFL-CIO for racketeering. And he wrote these articles, Crime on the Waterfront. It took a long, long time. Very courageous, very gutsy.
Imagine.
And won the Pulitzer Prize, and then sold the rights to Hollywood. And the movie On the Waterfront was made from those articles. They brought in Bud Schulberg to write the script. And Ilya Kazan directed. It had a great cast. Marlon Brando and so on.
Still a wonderful film.
So that was the background. Yeah, that was
very interesting.
Yeah, I've not had my movie yet.
Well, maybe it'll be coming shortly. I just want to remind our viewers that you're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our special guest this evening is Mr. Haynes Johnson, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and historian. One of the other things I wanted to talk with you about, in fact, is your fiction. You have at least one novel called The Landing.
Yes.
Are you planning to do any more? Maybe you've done others that I don't know about.
Well, no, that's a very interesting thing. I always wanted to write. I used to write short stories when I was in high school. In the Army, I wrote short stories. I like the fictional, again, storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I did that. The novel, The Landing, is about the saboteurs who landed in 1942 with a mission, this is a true story, to create waves of terror. They were called terror and sabotage throughout the United States. The United States was losing the war and so forth. My friend Howard Simons was the managing editor of the Post in charge of the Watergate coverage. And he came to me and said, I have an idea for a book, a novel. I had written about race relations in Washington and so forth and history. And that was the genesis for our story. And we went to the archives, we got the stuff, and then he would craft an idea, a line, then I'd take it and write it. And it was a wonderful thing, and I loved it. And the book became a bestseller. We never got a movie out of it. We had several. We sold it several times, never made it, but it was a fun.
They optioned it.
Yeah, and I had drafted two sequels for that. But then Howard, who left the Post and he took over at Harvard University, the fellowships there, and then he died of cancer. And I didn't think it was right, since it was a joint operation, to carry it on myself. But I have these two other sequels.
Ready to go.
Well, maybe someday.
That's good.
But fiction is something I've thought about going back to.
Well, I think it would be a natural extension.
Yeah, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do next after this book project, but these times cry out for someone to try to talk about who we are, what's happening to us. I don't know that I'm the person to do that. Egotistically, I don't mean that at all, but it's a great venue.
To be able to get that message out. But how do you maintain your optimism in the face of all that you've seen? I mean, frankly, a lot of journalists would have a hard edge to them, with regard to the things they see, the things that disappoint them, the things that don't work.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's foolishness, but I've seen us surmount every tragedy and not be beaten. I remember the Kennedy assassinations, both at those period of time, the riots, King's death. I went there that night. I was in Memphis when the blood was still coming down from the balcony in the Lorraine Motel, and I flew down with the 82nd Airborne in the middle of the night, and all that. And but then Bob Kennedy, we were very close, and yet we always came back. And it seems to me the story of America is the story of a people who can take adversity, who are the most diverse people in the world, who come from all over the place, all the backgrounds. And yes, we've had hard experiences in our mutual national lives. Recently, we had a pretty good time, and now it's bad again. But we've always surmounted them. Now, maybe that's foolish optimism, but I really have seen it in my lifetime. And I look at history, tells me that we have done that. We've come back and gotten better, not worse. So we'll see.
Interesting. You said a couple of times now that you were close to Bobby Kennedy.
Yes.
Do you mind talking about that a little bit? I know. I don't mean the tragedy of his death. I mean what he stood for, what he was representing.
Well, we had a very complicated relationship. I had done a book on the Bay of Pigs, and I spent 2 years on that book. Went to Florida, traveled with the Cuban Brigade, went to Central America where they were sent off, and Bob was then the Attorney General, but he was actually operating in charge of CIA. So we had a very he knew I was doing the book and so forth and so on. We almost got in a fist fight in his office one day. And he said, well, why don't you come to New York and join me? I'm going up to the Metropolitan Club. We'll have lunch and so forth. And I said, no, I said, yes, I would. But as I left, we got in a real argument. And I was young and foolish and so forth. He was hot-headed himself. We almost got in a fist fight, but then he grabbed me. He said, don't leave. Don't leave. And that's where we became close. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to tell you that. He was an incredibly different from his brother. I've always said that Bobby was the hot parish priest. Jack was the English lord.
Interesting.
And Bobby was just hot, passionate. He cared deeply. And after that experience of the Bay of Pigs, he loved the book. He was very praiseworthy about it, and we saw each other a lot, and with Ethel and so forth. And so, he called me. I had a secretary call me at 2 o'clock in the morning in 1968 to say Bob was going to the New York the next morning and fly on the shuttle, he would like, would you like to join him? He'd like you to come up with him. That was the day he was going to announce for president. And even his brother didn't know that, Teddy. We went up to the UN and we spent that whole day, and then we came back. He said, "I want you to work for me."
In the campaign.
Yeah, but not as president, just to tell me what I'm doing wrong. That's the relationship we had.
Interesting.
And I said, "I won't work for you. I'll write about you, and we'll see." And I've always regretted that I didn't actually join him in a personal way.
That would have been very interesting, wouldn't it?
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. I mean, his campaign at the end was just
was
on fire.
And he became a great candidate, and he stirred a passion in the country that.
Yeah, he did.
And the loss, he was only 42 years old or something, whatever it was. Martin Luther King was only 38. We think about these young people.
Incredible.
Gone. And Jack was 46 when he was killed.
Yes.
And,
just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, so that wreckage, and we came out of that. We recovered. It changed us, but we recovered.
I'm going to just push that a bit. Was he perhaps the most memorable, most admirable politician you have covered?
Yes, without any question at all. Lyndon Johnson was fascinating. Richard Nixon was fascinating. They all were fascinating. But Bob was something else. He was so hot, so passionate. He cared. He could quote poetry and the Greeks and Aeschylus and so forth. And he would do that. And we'd have these conversations. Yeah. And you know, and he wanted so much to do what was the right thing for the country. And I'm not just saying this out of sainthood or so, but that's what I believed in him. And the tragedy of his loss coming after his brother was such an incredible, and the King's.
Sure, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was a terrible time in our history, and I remember those years too well, I'm afraid. Over the years, you've taught at Princeton, you've taught at Berkeley, George Washington, and now at the University of Maryland.
Right.
How does your teaching interact with your work? How do you see this as a whole?
I love teaching. I tell you what I love is teaching alone wouldn't be enough for me. I want to make clear what I'm saying. Yes. I love teaching. I love students because I learn from them. They're always changing generationally.
Yes, they
so
are.
I learn from their attitudes are very different from the time of the boom of the Clinton years. They were just nothing was going to happen. Then also in the recent period, now it's another turn down. So I learn from them, and I love the ability. I do seminars. I want them to share their experiences, and I tell everyone since Princeton. That's going back to '75. I tell every seminar. I said, look, when we're starting this, if you don't have more questions about the relationships between the press and the public and our political system, by the time you end the seminar, I failed. You ought to have more questions every day, and that's the. So I love it when if you can get them talking, get them engaged, learn who they are, and as I say, it's constantly changing.
Does it help you become a better writer?
Oh, absolutely.
In what ways?
Because I know where they're coming from, and I say generationally, and I've used some of them in books. In The Best of Times, I quoted a couple who were students at Stanford, for instance, and I used to lecture there. So it does. It enables me to see them, not just from my vantage point, but try to see them.
And testing ideas on them, I'm assuming.
Yeah, sure. And so I love it. I like teaching.
Now, you also have another life, and that's as an electronic journalist, on regular appearances on Washington Week in Review, Jim Lehrer program, the Today Show. How does that interface with everything else you're doing?
Well, it's funny about that. I enjoy talking into the camera. I like to share ideas. I like to have conversations. Those were all shows where we'd talk around a table. Or on the Today Show, when I used to do that, I would just be interviewed one-on-one. I think I was on every Friday, and so forth. But what's interesting about the television is so different from writing. You can't. Television is attenuated. You can't have long paragraphs. You have to really learn. One of my friends was the executive producer of Huntley Brinkley, and when I started this, I said, they told me I'm only going to have 1.5 minutes on the Today Show. I said, that's not enough time. He said, Haynes, take off your watch. I said, now let's just start talking. That's only 5 seconds right there.
Right.
And so that, you know, and it taught me,
think.
absolutely, it taught me a great lesson about the difference of the different, but the whole idea, again, is trying to convey a story, if you can, or share knowledge, or learn from your collaborators. It's great. I love it.
It does. It really gives your whole career that kind of completion, I think, and because well, I'll put it differently. It puts you in a position of being more of a public intellectual in that particular circumstance.
Well, that'd be nice if I were.
Well, I think that's a help. I think it gives you that opportunity. Let's go back to the beginning of the conversation about the future of journalism. You know, where it's headed. I mean, I found it amazing this year that one of the winners of the Pulitzer Prize, his paper couldn't even report on it when it happened because they only published 3 days a week. You know,
it is really a very tragic situation we're going through. I have so many friends who have lost their jobs, newspapers cutting back, bankrupt, I mean, just big papers. The New York Times is in trouble. The Washington Post, where I spent my career for most of my life until I went to Maryland. I mean, I spent 20 years on the whatever it was, and they were the #1 in return of investment on the Fortune 500. And they were enormously prosperous. They still make money, but not from the newspaper. They're losing money.
They're making it from subsidiaries.
Yes, and so even the great institution. But the trouble, what people don't appreciate, is if you lose the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Los Angeles Times or the Washington Post, who commit enormous resources to have bureaus overseas, to cover the country, to cover the Congress, to cover in a way that not just a press conference, to try to find out, to inform the people of what's happening. You've drawn a blank to the public. And I think that's a tragedy. What's going to happen? I don't know. I think we're in a transformation. It's going to be electronic. It's going to be internet. I can't believe that the hunger for information is going to dissipate. We have a very, very intelligent young generation that deals with facts, absorbs things all over the place. How it takes form, I'm not sure yet. That's our challenge.
Do you ever see yourself going back into newspaper work?
No.
Never?
No. I did a column for a long time, and I liked the column, but I really I had done everything I wanted to do, and I don't see that. Books I like, the larger form. I got to think about what's the next one. And
I was going to wonder what thoughts do you have, or are you willing to share? I should say.
Well, my agent, when I just about finished the thing, said, "Now, what do you want to do next, Haynes?" I said, "Oh, I haven't even finished yet, but I do think about it, but I'm not sure. And what I want to do is get this thing cleared off. But I'm already thinking about it. But I don't have a single idea yet. I have a number of ideas.
Well, we're going to look forward to your
2000. But I don't know what it'll be.
Well, we're all going to look forward to your book on the 2008 election.
I hope you do, because not out of vanity, but I really think it's a great story and a great episode in our history. It's a transformational election in a transformational time.
I would agree. I'd like to thank our very special guest this evening, Mr. Haynes Johnson, for sharing his expertise with us. Please join us for future programs as we continue our exploration of the world of ideas. Until then, I'm Michael Marsden for Conversations from St. Norbert College.